Hello, everyone. My name is Yulia, and I'm on the communications team of the Feldenkrais Guild of North America. And it's my pleasure today to introduce to you Jeff Holler, who is a very well-known Feldenkrais trainer, Feldenkrais teacher of the teachers. And he graduated from Amherst training in 1983, I believe. And it was training, he studied directly with Moshe Feldenkrais. And I personally observed him when he came to Washington, D.C. and worked with people. I observed him give an FI, and he worked in a very interesting way with feet. So I thought I would ask him, why did you choose to work with people in such a way through the feet? And how did you get interested in that? And, you know, the topic of this conversation is obviously feet.
Wonderful. So shall I answer that?
Yeah.
Oh, wonderful. So there are two basic reasons why I'm so interested in the feet. The first basic reason that I'm interested in the feet is that Dr. Feldenkrais spoke about good posture being the ability to move in any direction without hesitation or preparation. And I always make a corollary to that. And that is determined on how specific we are in our relationship to the surface we're moving from. And so, in other words, when we're standing, if I'm not really clear as to where I find the points that I sustain myself from the ground, if I'm maladapted or I'm not well, I don't use my feet well, then my musculature has to be engaged to keep me from falling. And I'm at the effect of gravity. Gravity is pulling me to the ground. I'm using my musculature in a way that's inefficient. So that's one reason. But the other reason is I always ask the question of people, well, why do we have a skeleton? And that's a very simple reason. First of all, I mean, you could sit and you can reflect for a moment. But most people will say for support or so that you have a frame or all these things. But ultimately, we have a skeleton to cancel gravity. In the field of gravity, there's the downward force into the earth. And then on the other hand, because the world is elastic, even though it doesn't appear to us, there are elastic forces that come from the ground. And we learn to utilize those forces to come up through our skeleton so that we learn to cancel gravity. The forces coming up equalize the forces coming down. And that gives us an experience of being able to move with lightness and efficiency and grace and ease when we come to that particular state of organization. So I work with the feet a lot because it is from the feet that we learn how to find that sense of support and that availability to actually engage the ground in such a way that it benefits us. You know, we learn to lift ourselves away from the ground rather than fall into the ground. We learn to find the ground as a point of support. The ground provides us with opportunities that, for the most part, unless we study it, we lose. Yeah. So we use the feet. I mean, for example, I work a lot with people who have really bad sore backs and sore shoulders. And oftentimes we'll find that those people spend a lot of their lives just simply falling into themselves. And if I round my back a little bit and I fall into myself, my shoulders come forward and then I'm trying to lift my arm, I can't really make a change and help the person really discover how to use their shoulders effectively until they find the use of their skeleton effectively. And that all is always contingent upon finding high-level specific support. If the support's not there, the musculature must compensate. And if you're compensating, it's not easy. Yeah.
So you talk about the whole posture of a person. What does it mean to be supported by the feet? Do you mean arches? Do you mean mobility of the feet?
So the question is when you really look at the feet, there are three arches in the feet. the question is how do we utilize the arches in the feet? Yeah, and so there's the long arch, which goes from your heel basically out to your fourth toe, the metatarsal head of the fourth toe. That's the longest arch in our foot. There's the medial arch, which is on the inner edge of our feet. And of course, there's a transverse arch, which makes, if you looked at the sole of the foot, it sort of creates the tunnel within the foot. And so the question is how to use the arches in a way that is sequential, in such a way that your skeleton is organized. And it's very, very important for us to understand that one of the parts of the functioning of our motor system and the motor aspect of our brain is the process by which we organize the skeleton to act. So without getting too technical, but basically the first muscle fibers that are innervated when we begin an action are innervated to actually move and prepare the skeleton for action. And so it's a question of how we utilize images from ourselves, within ourselves, that we develop and refine these images, and so that we can spread the information to ourselves so that we can actually move our skeleton with a high degree of accuracy. So for us to find the use of the arches of our feet, which means to find, first of all, how to use the lateral arch, the long arch, the one that runs from our heel to our fourth toe. The lateral arch is the foundation for the other two arches. One of the bones in that arch is called the cuboid, and the cuboid literally, when your foot is well organized and you've learned how to find your feet in this way, the cuboid literally sits under the middle arch, the bones in your foot that help create the medial arch, the arch on the inside of your foot, and they help create the transverse arch. So it's a question of really learning how to utilize the foundation of your feet. There's a statement that plagued me for years, because in the Amherst training where I trained with Moshe, he made a statement one day, and it was kind of a throwaway statement, but he said, in walking, we find the head of the fourth metatarsal. And so the question was, for me, was, well, what in the hell is my fourth metatarsal in the first place? And why is it so? Why would Moshe make such a point about, in walking, finding the head of the fourth metatarsal? Then he said, walking is done in such a way that you have a sense that you're walking like a wheel, that there's always the process of placing your foot on the ground, and the foot on the ground is continually moving back behind you. And at the same time that it's moving back behind you, you're taking advantage of the most important part of a tire or wheel, which is the relationship with the ground. Many people will say it's the axle, but no, unless you have a relationship with the ground, you don't want to have bad tires on an icy day. Yeah, you want to have tires that have the capacity to actually engage with the ground. So the question is how do we utilize this engagement with the ground to our greatest benefit? If I'm using my feet in such a way that I'm collapsing into them, then my whole system has to protect me from falling further, which means that my whole system then loses, my muscle tone increases significantly to keep me from falling. And that's muscle tone that I do not have available for the simple act of moving where I want to move. Yeah. We want to be efficient. We want to have the most simple, elegant organization through our skeleton so that at any point in time, we can move, we can turn around ourselves, we have our head at the highest point possible, all of our teleceptors are available, and we have a sense that we're elegant and it's easy. Our breath becomes easy and light, the freedom in our joints becomes more clear, and we can experience a sense of potency. So I was just talking about how important the clear skeletal contact that you make with the ground informs the degree of awakeness, alertness, the presence, the sense of being present in the moment, the sense that you're available. I'm not available if I'm sunk in myself, gravity has a hold of me, and the world is shrouded in on me. I'm not alert to the moment in the same way as if I can truly find the internal sense of my skeleton supporting me. Now, it's difficult with the finding the support from the skeleton. This may be you can't feel your skeleton directly. There's no representation of your skeleton in your brain. So what it means is that your sense of your skeleton is an implied sense. You find when you're awake and alert, you'll find that your skeleton is actually there supporting you. You find when there's a minimal amount of effort to support yourself, then way you know that your skeleton is there. But if you're heavy or you're weighted or you have a sense that you shuffle or the sense that you don't, that every step you take, there's an aspect that you're falling down into yourself. Clearly, you're not in this particular pristine quality of being engaged through your skeleton. Yeah.
And how do you think Feldenkrais method can help with this increased efficiency?
Well, I think the Feldenkrais method not only, first of all, the thing that's most intriguing about the Feldenkrais method, people consider the Feldenkrais method to be a work that has to do with movement. And that's true. But to me, and this is my personal take on this in a moment, the Feldenkrais method is about attention. The Feldenkrais method is about organizing the evolutionary aspect, the prefrontal cortex of ourselves to come to a high level of attention. So our prefrontal cortex has it's our evolutionary advantage. It's interested in novelty, curiosity, imagination, spontaneity, and its greatest asset is that it can make high-level distinctions. It can discriminate. And so when we work with the Feldenkrais method, we use a very concrete process that goes between moving and sensing how we move so that we learn to use our attention in an exquisite way. Now, just because we use our attention in this exquisite way, then we can begin to watch our intention. And when you watch and discriminate with your intention, what your intention is producing, the way it's spreading information through you to enact, which is then the movement aspect. But then you get a feedback loop of the sensory information about what you're doing. And when you're in this feedback loop of the movement to the sensation and the movement to the sensation, you can begin to discriminate whether it's more pleasant or not, whether it's easier or not, whether you're moving with greater ease and grace or not. You can begin to eliminate the muscular habit that you've carried ever since you acquired your personal life story, your heritage. You wear your heritage in the way that in your muscular action. Now, you're not bound by that. Your brain is facile. It has tremendous capacity to create new variabilities, new matrices of movement and action that all become available for you to live three-dimensionally or multidimensionally in your life to expand your sense of self. When you wear your habitual tone, then that's how you identify. That's how you say, this is who I am. But after a really beautiful Feldenkrais lesson, and you get up and you realize that somehow that chrysalis, that cocoon that you've been in has been opened, and you have a sense that there's something of you that appears, some beauty of yourself, some availability that appears, some crack in your worldly view. Then the Feldenkrais method then provides us with that opportunity to be in that newly potentized state of ourselves. We don't have to wear the suit of our history, of our heritage. We actually, that's the opening moment as to where we begin to bring forth the potential that's been hidden within us for a long time. And that means that we have a completely different muscular tone that we're in for this period of time. That muscular tone will take advantage of your skeleton. Every lesson brings you to the place where you are more efficient. You simply, and you can't be efficient without reducing the extra burden on yourself. How many times have you gotten up from Feldenkrais lesson and you feel like, like you're floating in the world, right? Well, you can't float in the world and you can't float over the world when you're walking if you're falling in on yourself. Every lesson will provide a change in tone and provide us with a sense that we've organized our skeleton. When a lesson is performed really, really well, the lesson is reversible. Well, what does that mean truly? Because for most part, people in the Feldenkrais world think that a reversible movement is simply being able to go back through the pathway that you came from. But that's not Moshe's definition of reversibility. A reversible movement is one in which at every single point in time in the movement, the ground forces are coming through your skeleton at every moment in the movement in such a way that the ground forces come through your skeleton and they match the gravitational forces. You're always in a state where if you stop the movement, no work takes place. The movement is completely reversible. Yeah, it's not about retracing the path. It's not about falling for a moment and then going back through the path. It's the movement of sequentially, continually find support surface, continually finding the support so that every single moment your system is in fact, the tone within yourself is distributed evenly. So when we really begin to study the elements of awareness through movement, we reach a much higher level of what it is to be really efficient with ourselves. We take away all of the work that's unnecessary. And we learn to act with real ease. And of course, that's where your skeleton is. You know, that's the implied sense. You know that you're engaging your skeleton because it's easy. You have the support. You're organizing your nervous system in such a way that the tone that you're using in your musculature is organizing your skeleton to support you. You know that. You sense it. And then the question is how do you take that implied, that sense that you've experienced, then how do you carry that into your life? Rather than just returning back into your old gravitational field. How do you continue to elicit that and continue to bring that sense of life and awakeness forward in your personal life? Something like that.
Wow. Thank you. I love the metaphor of transformation, metamorphosis.
Yeah.
And that's definitely the theme we work with when we work with clients. And I think probably breaking the habit is the, part of it too. But yeah, sorry.
No, the habit just simply comes. Here's what, if you ask a neurophysiologist, how long does it take to break a habit? They'll tell you it takes 150th of a second. People will say weeks, months, years. No, the moment that you attend to what you're doing, you've already broken the habit. You are no longer in the habit. Your attention from the prefrontal cortex has already inserted itself in such a way that you're not in the habit. Habits are carried out unconsciously. Moment by moment, a habit is carried out. You're completely compulsive to carry out the habit. But if you're attending to what you're doing, what you're sensing, and how the movement is initiated, that moment that you're in attention, you are not in the habit. You are alert and awake and clear of your attention to be in the exploration of how the habit forms. You're not in the habit. It's 150th of a second to change a habit. And the funny thing is that what we don't know is that our brain is organized in such a way to change a habit in one go. We don't need years and years of practice. Basic functional habits like these can be changed in a single moment of observation.
Well, that's definitely very promising.
Well,
makes me optimistic.
When Moshe was asked this, he was asked, how long does it take to change a habit? And he says, oh, a very long time, unless with awareness, with clarity, without passion, and without effort, you see the habit. You see it with awareness, with clarity, without passion, without being emotionally charged, and without effort. You can see the habit, and then it can go in a single go. That's a quote from Amherst.
Oh, Oh, I love that without passion part. I've never heard this before.
Yeah.
The neutrality, I guess.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's actually a particular quality of openness. It's not being charged. When we're in this kind of attention, the limbic system, our emotional state has to be quiet. You can't observe with a highly refined abilities to sense small differences if you're emotionally charged. Imagine trying to do a calculus formulation while you're emotionally charged. You would need to be quiet and calm. So the attention is what modulates the limbic system and modulates the emotional centers so that you can have the openness to experience the potential for change.
Wow,
It's extraordinary work, this work. But this isn't what you wanted to ask me about. You wanted to ask me another question about the feet.
Oh, well, I'll get you back on this track. Well, what I'm curious about, you've been working with people for so long, you had extensive private practice. Did human feet change over the last 20, 30 years? Did you notice?
Well, I think what's happened is the footwear has changed over the years. I mean, we've gone through all these stages of the low heels, and then we've got the arches that are built in, and the footbeds that are built in. And the funny thing about footbeds, see, if you have footbeds and you think about it, everybody thinks that the important part of the footbed is the parts that supports the medial arch. That's not important. What's important is how the footbed creates the pattern with which you engage the floor when walking. There's actually a channel. If you look at your footbed, there's a channel from the heel out to the fourth toe. The proper organization of the foot in walking is to go from the heel to the fourth toe and then across the ball of the foot until the very last moment when you leave between your first and second toe. That's the way the foot is organized to provide you with continued sustained support and balance. Now, many times what people will do is they'll simply lean into the arch support. They'll fall on the arch support. It's still falling. They'll expect the arch support's going to take over the muscular work for them. It doesn't. It doesn't change the pattern. They engage in the same neurological pattern of walking, and they end up going through the first toe before they've used the whole foot. So the question is how do you learn to actually activate and use your whole foot in such a way that your foot provides you with a continual propulsion in such a way that you're lifting from the ground rather than falling into the ground, with both feet, one foot after the other. Now it takes some practice because it's not the way that we learn to walk. And I would actually argue with Feldenkrais in his book, Body and Mature Behavior. He describes walking, and were he alive, then that would be one of the areas that I would want to speak with him about, because I believe that there are better ways to find propulsion, so that when you're walking, when you're on your forward foot, I think there's a moment in which both heels are actually touching the ground. And he says when you go onto the forward foot, that your back heel is already in the air. But I don't think so. I think that there's a way of finding a sustaining support for a longer period of time and having a much higher level of reversibility in the way that you would expect a Tai Chi master to walk. The way that they could go forward and back, they could take pressure in any moment. And so they would be gliding and floating between their feet. And so that at any moment you could reverse your way back into your foot, and you would have the availability of your whole foot to receive the floor from behind and to go forward. And yet Moshe actually indicates that in a lesson in which he talks about walking backwards. And he talks about walking backwards in such a way as you walk backwards, if you had a piece of paper under your heel, when you walk backwards, you would touch the paper, but you don't press the paper into the ground. In other words, you would be finding an organization in your foot where your foot would be touching and available to go both forwards and backwards, but you're not falling backwards into your heel. You're not losing your balance by going backwards into your heel, which means that you have to recover from it. So Moshe gave us clues. It's a question of putting those clues together And the great thing about Moshe was he wasn't always consistent in his teaching. Yeah. He wasn't consistent in the message that he gave. In one lesson, he'll say, no, your hands are not for pushing. Lift yourself away from your hands. Lift yourself away from your feet. And then another lesson, I'll say, push with your feet. Push with your hands. Yeah. So the message can be funny. The question is what is going to be the essential message that you want to leave your students with when you're teaching awareness through movement? And that question is how do I have the sense that I'm elegant? I don't have a sense of being elegant when I fall in on myself. There's a quality of elegance that comes from the way that I simply lift myself away from the world and have a lightness and an ease and an alertness and awakeness, a sense of dimensionality to myself. Yeah.
Wow. There's a lot, there's the ideal to strive for. Would you recommend?
But I wouldn't strive for it, would you? We're Feldenkrais practitioners.
I mean, it's taking me years, so to be honest.
Yes, I understand, but
it's a never-ending process, yeah.
Yes, the process, but the striving has within it all the elements of effort that we're trying to eliminate. We're trying to return to this process of attending, and the process of attending leads to asking questions. There's no striving in this particular process. It is the continued process of, I just took this step and I just fell. I fell in, I could feel my arches collapse. So now I have an idea that my arches are meant to form in such a way that when my arches form, that I can lift myself away from the ground. How would I discover that? Moshe said, in walking, you find the head of the fourth metatarsal. It took me years to uncover what he meant with that. Years. Yeah, it wasn't something, it became a point of curiosity. What does it mean when I place my foot on the floor or I leave the foot that's behind me and I utilize my foot to move myself forward? How can I utilize my foot in such a way that it provides me with the means for being reversible, basic principle of the Feldenkrais method, and stable, that I have a rudder that I can move and that I can move on from one leg onto the other in such a way that I can reverse the movement, but I have this full potency to lift myself easily as well. Now, with what we're doing with today over the years, we've learned a lot about. We started off with these really pillowy, cushiony shoes with heels, and then all of a sudden we learned about heel strike and all the forces that go through you when you're running and walking with a heavy heel strike. And then we learned about walking on the midfoot, and then we went to these 5 fingers toes people. And then we understood that all this work of landing on the midfoot begins to affect the Achilles tendon profoundly. And so now we're back to these other kind of shoes that now are rockers. They rock you through the movement with a very cushiony kind of sole. And in other words, we're expecting the shoes to provide us with some element of organization for us that alleviates our lack of understanding how to really use our feet. Yeah. Then the question becomes, well, how do I really learn to use my feet and propel myself in such a way that I enjoy walking? Yeah.
So do you have, I mean, this has been such a rich discussion. I think I'll need to rewatch this a couple of times to absorb all of it. But do you have any last words for our audience? Any simple recommendations on how to start moving in that direction of organizing?
Well, I think there are some great ATM lessons. The interlacing the toes lessons, because of the way that you have to splay your legs and to organize yourself and to bring your toes. In other words, you're asking all of the way that you sense yourself, your skin senses, your tendon senses, your muscular senses, the fascial, the elasticity in your fascia and the relationship with the joint receptors. All that information that helps you provide you with your sense of how you're organized in space becomes really alert when you're in this new configuration for yourself. But that whole process invites you to do what with your feet? What do? You ground your little toe towards your big toe. It means you begin to emphasize the fourth toe, the outside edge of the foot. It begins to create a sense that, so that when you get up from this lesson, when you've interlaced your toes, you can interlace them from the top and the bottom, but ultimately, if you interlace them so your little toes come together, then you've met the fourth metatarsal, has met the fourth metatarsal. Your system is going to roll in such a way that you're going to get up and you're going to have a spiraling from your fourth metatarsal, from your heels, and it's going to create a subtle spiral into your leg into your hip joints, which will lift up and through you rather than fall. It's the opposite spiral that you have as if you collapse into pronation. There's another lesson called edges of the feet that I can hardly recommend because it is a study of the edges of the feet. And there are elements in that study of that lesson, because if you just take the lesson in the way that Moshe teaches it, you end up trying to lift the inner edge of the foot. It would be great if people also understood that instead of lifting the inner arch over the lateral arch, that one would actually begin to discover that you can turn the lateral arch up and under the medial arch. And then you've got, again, this emphasis on the heel to the fourth toe. So there are many, many different ways to utilize the lessons that emphasize finding real support, specific support from the surface we're on, and especially for our feet to find really specific support so that when we can stand at the highest point on our skeleton rather than fall into ourselves. Yeah. I mean, we're meant to be erect. We're meant to be able to turn without any hesitation forward and back. Yeah. To turn around ourselves, to step forward, to step back. Our muscle tissue, our muscle tone is organized to continually be in a state that we can lift ourselves if we desire it. That doesn't mean that you can't lower your center of gravity, of course. But if you desire really a sense of lightness and ease, we can evolve to that. Yeah.
Well, thank you so much. You inspire me to go out there and float.
But why not? I mean, there's no reason. There's no reason not to. It is a matter of attention, a matter of a conscious attention for a period of time. And that conscious attention, for the most part, is unfamiliar to most of us. But it takes a while to continually to attend. But when you do, you'll find that in that attention and with your questions and curiosity, you'll find things about yourself that will be so interesting that it'll be more important in some ways than goal orientation or achieving some other status. That your own internal experience becomes more important than some of the other things that people aspire to. So.
Thank you. Thank
All
you.
right.
A lot here. And I think our audience will really enjoy this conversation. Thank you.
Great, wonderful. All right.